The summer heat shimmered across the Texas plains like a mirage, but the whispers that followed Josephine Blackburn were as real as the scorch marks on her soul. "Baron," they said behind gloved hands as she passed the mercantile. "Poor thing will never know a child's love." At 25, with a past that left scars deeper than the drought-cracked earth, Josephine had almost resigned herself to their truth until the day Vaughn Ellis rode into Redemption Springs with dust on his boots and hope in his weathered hands. Josephine pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of Dr. Morrison's office, the morning sun doing little to warm the chill that had settled in her bones. The physician's words echoed in her mind, familiar but no less painful for their repetition. "I'm sorry, Miss Blackburn. The fever you suffered as a girl, the scarring is extensive. It would be a miracle if you ever conceived." She blinked back tears as she made her way down the wooden boardwalk. 5 years she'd been hearing those words, ever since she'd first consulted the doctor at 20, wondering why her monthly courses were so irregular. 5 years of watching other women in town swell with life while she remained unchanged, except for the growing weight of disappointment. "Morning, Miss Josephine." Mrs. Fletcher nodded from the doorway of her husband's general store. "Fine day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is." Josephine forced a smile. She'd become adept at wearing masks, the cheerful schoolteacher, the dutiful daughter, the woman content with her lot. None of them true, but all necessary for survival in a town where a woman's worth was measured by the children she bore. Redemption Springs had been her home for 3 years now, ever since she'd answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher. The position had seemed like salvation after her father's death left her alone in the world. The small house provided by the town council was more than adequate for a single woman, and teaching gave her purpose. If she couldn't have children of her own, at least she could pour her love into educating others. "Miss Blackburn," a young voice called out, and Josephine turned to see 10-year-old Emma Montgomery running toward her, blonde braids flying. "Are we still having our special reading lesson today?" Josephine's smile became genuine. "We certainly are, Emma. 4 o'clock sharp. I've been practicing." The girl beamed, revealing a gap where her front tooth had been. "I'm looking forward to hearing you." Josephine patted her shoulder before the child darted away. These moments sustained her brief connections with the children she taught, watching their minds unfold like desert flowers after rain. But at night, in her small house at the edge of town, the emptiness echoed. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the street. A stranger rode into town, his broad-shouldered form silhouetted against the morning sun. He sat tall in the saddle, controlling his spirited chestnut stallion with an easy confidence that spoke of years spent in the saddle. Josephine wouldn't have given him more than a passing glance. Drifters came through Redemption Springs regularly, except that he dismounted right in front of her, tipping his hat with a gesture that seemed almost courtly. "Madam." His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that suggested he didn't use it often. "Could you direct me to Mayor Thompson's office?" Up close, she could see his features clearly, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, eyes the color of a stormy sky, and lines at their corners that hinted at both laughter and hardship. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his face, a quiet strength that made her meet his gaze longer than propriety dictated. "2 buildings down, sir, with the blue door." She gestured toward the town hall. "Much obliged." He nodded, and she noticed a scar that ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "Vaughn Ellis," he added, offering his name without prompting. "Josephine Blackburn." She wasn't sure why she provided her own name in return. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her directly, without the pity or assessment she'd grown accustomed to from men who'd heard the rumors. The schoolteacher. His eyebrows lifted in recognition. You've heard of me. She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Mayor Thompson mentioned you in his letter, said Redemption Springs was blessed with the finest teacher this side of the Mississippi. Warmth bloomed in her cheeks. The mayor is overly generous with his praise. I doubt that. His eyes held hers for a moment before he nodded again. Good day, Miss Blackburn. She watched as he led his horse toward the hitching post in front of the town hall, wondering what business he had with the mayor and why Thompson would have mentioned her in correspondence. Curiosity prickled, but she had lessons to prepare and chores awaiting her attention. Only later, when the town buzzed with news that Vaughn Ellis was the new ranch foreman at the Thompson property, did Josephine understand. The previous foreman had been killed in a cattle rustling incident 2 months prior, and the mayor had been searching for a replacement with a reputation for both skill and integrity. What she couldn't understand was why, over the following weeks, Vaughn Ellis seemed to appear wherever she went, offering to carry her parcels from the general store, tipping his hat when they passed on the street, even attending Sunday services, though rumor had it he wasn't a particularly religious man. He's sweet on you, suggested Martha Simmons, the milliner's wife, as they arranged flowers for the church altar one Saturday morning. Half the unmarried women in town would swoon for a glance from those eyes, and he only has eyes for our schoolteacher. Don't be ridiculous. Josephine concentrated on the arrangement before her, refusing to acknowledge the flutter in her stomach at Martha's words. Mr. Ellis is simply being polite. Martha snorted, a most unladylike sound. Polite doesn't ride 5 miles into town on his day off just to escort a lady home from choir practice. It was raining, Josephine protested. He would have done the same for anyone. Keep telling yourself that, dear. Martha patted her hand. But a man doesn't look at a woman the way he looks at you if he's merely being polite. That evening, as Josephine sat on her porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, the clip-clop of hooves announced a visitor. Vaughn Ellis rode up, his tall form backlit by the setting sun. Evening, Miss Blackburn. He dismounted, removing his hat. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all. She gestured to the empty chair beside her, propriety forgotten in the twilight hush. What brings you to town on a Saturday evening, Mr. Ellis? He settled beside her, his long legs stretching out. Mayor Thompson asked me to deliver some papers to Judge Wilson. A pause. And I wanted to see if you might allow me to escort you to the Founders' Day dance next weekend. The directness of his request startled her. I wasn't planning to attend. No. His gaze was steady. I've heard it's quite the event. It is, but... She hesitated, uncertain how to explain that such gatherings only emphasized her outsider status. The whispers seemed louder when surrounded by families and couples. I'm not much for dancing myself, he admitted, a rueful smile softening his features. 2 left feet, my mother always said, but I thought perhaps you might enjoy the music, at least. Something in his tone, a note of vulnerability beneath the confidence, made her reconsider. You're very kind to ask, Mr. Ellis. Not kind, he shook his head. Selfish, actually. I'd like your company. The honesty in his words disarmed her. Then yes, I would be pleased to accompany you. His smile transformed his face, erasing years and hardship in an instant. I'll call for you at 6 then. After he left, Josephine remained on the porch long after darkness fell, wondering at the strange lightness in her chest. She had never given much thought to romance or marriage, especially after learning of her condition. What man would want a wife who couldn't give him children? In the West, where families needed many hands to work the land, a barren woman was a liability. Yet Vaughn Ellis looked at her as though she were a treasure rather than damaged goods. It was unsettling and exhilarating all at once. The Founders' Day dance exceeded Josephine's expectations. Vaughn arrived punctually, wearing a clean black suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his dark hair, but it was the nervousness in his eyes that endeared him to her. "You look beautiful," he said, taking in her blue dress, the nicest she owned, rarely worn. "Thank you." She accepted his arm, feeling unaccountably shy. The town hall had been transformed with lanterns and wildflowers. A small band played and couples whirled across the wooden floor. Josephine noticed the curious glances they attracted, but found she didn't mind. There was something protective about Vaughn's presence that made the usual whispers seem distant and unimportant. True to his word, Vaughn wasn't much of a dancer, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of grace. He stepped on her toes twice during a lively reel, apologizing profusely each time, and Josephine found herself laughing, truly laughing for the first time in longer than she could remember. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for air. The night was velvet dark, punctuated by stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I should warn you," Vaughn said quietly. "People talk. People always talk," she sighed. "Especially about me." His gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm considered something of a lost cause in Redemption Springs. 25, unmarried and—" She swallowed. "Unable to have children." The words hung between them, and she braced herself for his reaction, the polite withdrawal, the sudden realization that his attention had been misplaced. Instead, he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "My sister couldn't have children either. She and her husband adopted 3, finest parents I've ever known." The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "Most men want sons of their own blood. Most men are fools." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "A family is made by love, not blood." Before she could respond, Mayor Thompson approached, a broad smile beneath his bushy mustache. "Ellis, just the man I wanted to see." That new breeding bull arrived from San Antonio, magnificent beast. The moment broken, Josephine excused herself to join the other ladies refreshing themselves at the punch table. Martha Simmons immediately cornered her. "Well, Mr. Ellis certainly can't take his eyes off you. Half the town is talking about it." "Is that so?" Josephine tried to sound unconcerned. "Indeed." Martha leaned closer. "Though some are wondering what his intentions might be given your situation." The familiar pain stabbed through her. "My situation?" Martha had the grace to look embarrassed. "You know how people are, dear. They just wonder what a man like Ellis, who's made no secret of wanting a large family someday, sees in a woman who can't provide one." Josephine set down her punch, suddenly nauseated. Of course. She'd allowed herself to forget for one evening the reality of her circumstances. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." She slipped out the side door, gulping in the night air, angry at herself for the tears that threatened. She'd known better than to hope, to dream, to imagine even for a moment that someone might want her despite her flaws. "Josephine," Vaughn's voice came from behind her. "Are you all right?" She wiped her eyes quickly before turning. "Yes, just a headache. I think I should go home." His brow furrowed with concern. "I'll take you." The ride to her house was silent, Josephine lost in thoughts too painful to share. When they arrived, Vaughn helped her down from his horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "Did I do something to upset you?" he asked, his voice low. "No." She shook her head. "You've been nothing but kind." "Then what changed? One minute you were laughing, the next you couldn't get away fast enough." The directness that had charmed her now felt like an intrusion. "Nothing changed, Mr. Ellis. I simply remembered who I am." His frown deepened. "And who is that?" A woman who can't give a man what he wants. The words tasted bitter. What you want, according to town gossip, a large family. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Ah, yes. She moved toward her door. Thank you for a lovely evening, but I think it's best if my sister, he interrupted. The one I mentioned. She tried to kill herself when the doctor told her she couldn't have children. The statement was so unexpected, so raw, that Josephine froze. Her husband found her in time. Vaughn's voice was steady, but his eyes reflected old pain. I was there when he carried her into the house, blood everywhere. I was there when he told her that he'd married her, not her womb. Josephine couldn't speak. They have 3 children now, 2 girls and a boy they took in after his parents died of cholera. A family made by choice, not chance. He stepped closer. So when I hear people say a woman's worth is measured by her ability to bear children, it makes me want to put my fist through a wall. His vehemence startled her. I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't. His expression softened. But I won't let you push me away because of small-minded gossip, not unless you truly don't want my company. The vulnerability beneath his words touched her. It's not that. Then what? How could she explain the years of feeling less than, of seeing pity in people's eyes, of knowing she would never experience the miracle of creating life? It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. He reached out, tentatively tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not asking for promises, Josephine, just a chance to know you better. The gentleness in his touch undid her. All right. His smile returned, slow and warm. I'll call on you tomorrow if that's acceptable. She nodded, and after he left, she stood on her porch, listening to the receding hoofbeats and wondering if she'd just made the wisest decision of her life or the most foolish. Vaughn was true to his word. The next day, he arrived at her door with a small bouquet of wildflowers and an invitation to picnic by the creek. It was the first of many such outings over the summer months. He would ride into town whenever his duties at the ranch allowed, sometimes just for an hour to walk with her after school, other times for entire Sundays spent in conversation that ranged from books to politics to their childhoods. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith, that he had fought briefly for the Union in the war before a bullet to the shoulder sent him home, that he had drifted west afterward, working cattle drives and breaking horses until Mayor Thompson's letter had brought him to Redemption Springs. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston, her father's work as a professor, her mother's death when she was 12, how she had nursed her father through his final illness at 19, only to discover he had left nothing but debts, how she had trained as a teacher and headed west, seeking independence and a fresh start. What she didn't tell him, not yet, was the full story of her infertility. The scarlet fever at 15 that had nearly killed her. The doctor's somber explanation years later that the disease had damaged her reproductive organs beyond repair. The broken engagement when her fiancé learned the truth. Still, as summer ripened into fall, she found herself thinking of sharing even these painful chapters. Vaughn had proven himself different from other men she had known, more patient, more willing to listen, more interested in her mind than in the conventional trappings of womanhood. You're falling in love with him, Martha observed one September afternoon as they sewed together in Josephine's sitting room. I don't know what you mean. But the heat in her cheeks betrayed her. He's a good man, Martha continued, ignoring her denial. The mayor says he's never had a more reliable foreman, and the way he looks at you. She sighed dramatically, like you hung the moon and stars. He deserves someone who can give him children, Josephine said quietly, the familiar refrain she repeated to herself whenever her feelings threatened to overwhelm her caution. Martha set down her needlework. Have you told him about your condition? He knows I can't have children. I told him the night of the Founders' Day dance. And he said family is made by love, not blood. The memory still warmed her. Smart man. Martha nodded approvingly. So what's holding you back? The question lingered as autumn painted the countryside in golds and reds. Vaughn continued his courtship with a steady patience that both reassured and terrified Josephine. The more time they spent together, the more she could envision a future with him, a possibility she had long since relinquished. The breaking point came on a crisp October evening. They had ridden to a ridge overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues. As darkness fell, Vaughn built a small fire and they sat close together, sharing a blanket against the growing chill. "I've been offered a job," he said suddenly. "Foreman position on a ranch near Austin, twice the pay, newer buildings." Josephine's heart lurched. "Are you going to take it?" He stared into the flames. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay in Redemption Springs." His gaze shifted to her face, intent and questioning. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. "Vaughn, I'm in love with you, Josephine." The words were simple, direct, like the man himself. "Have been since the day you directed me to the mayor's office. If you don't feel the same, I'll ride to Austin next week and trouble you no more. But if there's a chance—" "I do feel the same," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "But there are things you don't know about me." "Tell me, then." So she did. All of it: the fever, the scarring, the medical certainty of her barrenness, the shame and guilt she'd carried, feeling somehow that her body had betrayed her. The dreams of motherhood she'd reluctantly buried. When she finished, tears streaking her face, Vaughn reached for her hands. "Thank you for trusting me with this." "You still don't understand," she insisted. "I can never give you children, not ever." The doctor was absolutely clear. "I understand perfectly." His voice was calm. "And I'm telling you it doesn't matter to me." "How can it not matter?" "You said yourself you want a family." "I want you." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Children would be a blessing, but they're not a requirement. We could adopt, like my sister, or we could be just us. Either way, I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you would consent to be my wife." The unexpected proposal stole her breath. "You're asking me to marry you?" A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Not very romantically, it seems. I had planned something more conventional." "No, this is perfect." And it was just the two of them, firelight dancing across their faces, honesty between them. "But I need you to be certain. This isn't a decision you can undo." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It was my mother's." "Nothing fancy, but it's beautiful," she interrupted, tears welling again, but different tears, joyful ones. "Josephine Blackburn, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I will." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, the fire had dimmed to embers, and the stars overhead seemed to shine with particular brilliance. "We should head back," he murmured against her hair. "Before your reputation is completely ruined." She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I think that ship has sailed. The whole town will be talking by morning. Let them talk." He helped her to her feet. "For once, they'll have something worth gossiping about." The wedding was set for December. A quiet ceremony in the town church with only close friends in attendance. Mayor Thompson insisted on hosting the reception at his home, and Martha organized a quilting bee to create a wedding gift that would keep them warm through many winters together. As she put it with a wink that made Josephine blush, Not everyone approved, of course. Josephine overheard Mrs. Palmer telling the butcher's wife that it was cruel of Josephine to trap a virile young man like Ellis when she can't give him heirs. But such comments bothered her less than they once had. Vaughn's certainty seemed to fortify her own. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A fierce winter storm blew in from the north, bringing freezing rain that coated everything in ice. Vaughn and the other ranch hands worked around the clock to protect the cattle, moving them to sheltered areas and breaking ice on water troughs. On the third day of the storm, Josephine received word that Vaughn had been injured thrown from his horse when the animal slipped on ice. The messenger, a young ranch hand named Timothy, looked grim as he delivered the news. "He's asking for you, Miss Blackburn. Doc Adams is with him, but—" The boy swallowed hard. "It don't look good." Heart pounding, Josephine gathered her warmest clothes and medical supplies. The ride to the Thompson ranch was treacherous, ice cracking beneath her horse's hooves, but fear drove her forward. She found Vaughn in the foreman's cabin, pale against the sheets, Dr. Adams wrapping his ribs with practiced hands. 3 broken ribs and a nasty gash on his head, the doctor informed her quietly. "The ribs will heal with time, but I'm concerned about the head injury." He was unconscious for nearly an hour. Vaughn's eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice. "Josephine." His voice was weak, but his smile was genuine. "Told them not to worry you. Of course they worried me." She took his hand, alarmed at how cold his fingers felt. "You're my future husband. Your problems are my problems now." Over the next week, Josephine barely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside his bed, bathing his fevered brow when infection set in, forcing broth between his lips when he was too weak to feed himself. Dr. Adams came daily, his expression growing more concerned as Vaughn's fever persisted. "If the fever doesn't break soon." The doctor didn't need to finish the thought. On the 7th night, Vaughn's condition worsened dramatically. His breathing became labored, his skin burning to the touch despite the cool compresses Josephine applied. In desperation, she sent for Dr. Adams, but the messenger returned alone. The doctor was attending a difficult birth across town and couldn't come until morning. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely to Vaughn's unconscious form. "We haven't even started our life together. You promised me a chance." Throughout the night, she fought for him, praying, bathing his skin with cool water, talking to him continuously, so he would have her voice to follow back from wherever fever had taken him. Near dawn, when her own strength was failing, she crawled onto the bed beside him, cradling his head against her breast. "I love you," she murmured, tears falling onto his face. "Please stay with me." Whether it was her words, her tears, or simply the turning point of the infection, Vaughn's fever broke just as the first light of dawn crept through the window. His eyes opened, clearer than they had been in days. "Josephine." His voice was hoarse but alert. "I'm here." She stroked his face, scarcely believing the coolness beneath her fingers. "Did you say you love me?" A faint smile touched his lips. Relief washed through her like a tide. "I did." "Good." His eyes drifted closed again, but this time in normal sleep rather than fevered unconsciousness. "Because I love you too." Dr. Adams pronounced it a miracle when he arrived later that morning. By all rights, with a fever that high for that long, he should be dead or brain damaged. Instead, he's sleeping naturally and his pulse is strong. "He's stubborn," Josephine said simply, though privately she wondered if love itself might possess healing properties science couldn't explain. The wedding was postponed until February to allow Vaughn time to regain his strength. When the day finally arrived, Josephine wore a cream-colored dress Martha had helped her make, with lace salvaged from her mother's wedding gown. Vaughn stood tall at the altar. showing no sign of his recent brush with death except a new scar along his hairline. "I, Vaughn, take thee, Josephine, to be my wedded wife," he vowed, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As she repeated the vows, Josephine felt a certainty she had never known before. Whatever the future held, whatever joys or sorrows awaited them, they would face it together. Their first home as a married couple was the foreman's cabin on the Thompson Ranch, expanded and improved during Vaughn's convalescence. Mayor Thompson had insisted on adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the kitchen as a wedding gift, making the small structure into a cozy home that Josephine took pride in maintaining. Married life suited them both. Vaughn's work kept him outdoors most days, but he always returned to Josephine with stories and observations that made her laugh. She continued teaching at the school, finding that marriage had somehow enhanced rather than diminished her standing in the community. The whispers about her barrenness faded as people observed the obvious happiness of the newlyweds. Spring arrived with its riot of wildflowers, painting the plains in blues and yellows. Josephine planted a small garden beside the cabin, nurturing seedlings as she and Vaughn settled into the rhythms of shared life. If sometimes she felt a pang when watching mothers with their children after Sunday services, she kept it to herself. The joy she had found with Vaughn was more than she had ever dared hope for. In late April, Josephine awoke one morning feeling unusually nauseated. She barely made it outside before emptying her stomach in the bushes beside the porch. "Must have been something I ate," she told Vaughn when he expressed concern. But when the sickness returned the next morning and the next, a different possibility began to form in her mind, one so improbable, so miraculous, that she hardly dared consider it. After a week of morning sickness, she finally confided in Martha during a Saturday visit to town. "It can't be," she insisted, even as she described symptoms that any married woman would recognize. Dr. Morrison was absolutely clear. Martha's eyes widened. "Doctors can be wrong, dear. Especially about women's matters. My own mother was told she couldn't have more children after my brother was born, and then along I came 10 years later, but the scarring from the fever. God works in mysterious ways." Martha squeezed her hand. "You should see Dr. Adams. He's younger than Morrison, trained in Philadelphia. He might have a different perspective." The following Monday, while Vaughn was out with the cattle, Josephine visited Dr. Adams. The examination was brief but thorough, and when the doctor stepped back, his expression was one of wonder. "Well, Mrs. Ellis, it appears the impossible has happened. You're approximately 6 weeks pregnant." The words didn't seem real. "Are you certain as medical science allows?" He smiled kindly. "The female body is a remarkable thing, capable of healing and adaptation beyond our understanding. Whatever scarring you had may have been less extensive than Dr. Morrison believed, or perhaps your body found a way around it. But is it safe?" Fear mingled with her joy. "Given my condition." "We'll need to monitor you closely," he admitted. "But many women with similar histories have delivered healthy babies. I see no reason why you can't be one of them." She left his office in a daze, her mind spinning with possibilities she had long since abandoned. A child. Her child. Hers and Vaughn's. She waited until dinner to tell him, her hands trembling as she placed a small pair of knitted booties beside his plate, a project she had started in secret that afternoon, working frantically to finish before he returned. Vaughn stared at the tiny items, uncomprehending at first, then with dawning realization. "Josephine," his voice cracked, "are you saying—" "I'm pregnant." The words felt foreign on her tongue. "Dr. Adams confirmed it today." For a moment he sat motionless, shock evident in every line of his face. Then he was on his feet, pulling her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled the cat from its place by the stove. "A baby," he kept saying, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "The doctor says we shouldn't get our hopes too high," she cautioned. "Given my history, there's a risk." "We'll face whatever comes," he interrupted, pressing his forehead to hers. "Together. But right now, in this moment, I'm going to believe in miracles." His faith bolstered her own. As spring melted into summer, and her body began to change, her waistline thickening, her breasts becoming tender, Josephine allowed herself to hope. Each week that passed without complication felt like a gift, each flutter of movement within her womb a small miracle. Word spread quickly through Redemption Springs. Some, like Martha, expressed genuine delight. Others were more skeptical, whispering that it wouldn't last, that her body would betray her again. Josephine found she no longer cared what they thought. The life growing inside her was proof enough that they had been wrong. The pregnancy progressed normally, much to Dr. Adams's satisfaction. "The healthiest mother to be in my practice," he declared during her 7th month. "Whatever problems you had before, they don't seem to be affecting this pregnancy one bit." Vaughn became increasingly protective, insisting she reduce her teaching hours and hiring a young woman to help with household chores. His tenderness touched her deeply, the way he rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings, read aloud to her from novels she enjoyed, constructed a cradle with his own hands during the long winter evenings. "Boy or girl?" he would ask, his hand resting on her growing belly. "Girl," Josephine always answered, though she had no way of knowing, "with your eyes and my stubbornness." "God help us all," he would laugh. As her time drew near, Josephine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, from the lonely schoolteacher, convinced she would never know motherhood, to a woman on the verge of delivering a child created in love. Whatever happened, she had already experienced more joy than she had believed possible. Labor began on a mild February evening, almost exactly a year after their wedding. Vaughn rode for Dr. Adams and Martha, while Josephine paced the cabin, breathing through the early contractions as the older women in town had advised. The birth was long and difficult. For 18 hours Josephine labored, Vaughn never leaving her side despite Martha's insistence that men traditionally waited elsewhere. When her strength flagged, he supported her. When fear threatened to overwhelm her, his steady voice anchored her to the present. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as dawn broke and the contractions intensified. "You can do this." With a final, tremendous effort, Josephine brought their daughter into the world just as the morning sun crested the horizon. The baby's first cry filled the cabin, strong, indignant, alive. "A girl," Dr. Adams announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Josephine's chest. "And a healthy one at that." Tears streamed down Vaughn's face as he touched his daughter's tiny hand for the first time. "She's perfect." "Victoria," Josephine whispered, her exhaustion forgotten as she counted fingers and toes. "Victoria Grace Ellis. After my mother." Vaughn's voice was thick with emotion. "She would have loved that." In the days that followed, news of Victoria's birth spread through Redemption Springs like wildfire. Visitors came bearing gifts and congratulations, many expressing amazement at the miracle baby born to a woman everyone had believed barren. Mrs. Palmer, who had been among the most vocal doubters, arrived with a hand-knitted blanket and tears in her eyes. "I was wrong about you, Josephine," she admitted. "About many things, even Dr. Morrison visited, examining the baby with professional curiosity before declaring her as robust a child as I've seen in 30 years of practice." "I don't understand it," he confessed to Josephine. "Medically speaking, this shouldn't have been possible." "Perhaps medicine doesn't have all the answers," she suggested gently, cradling Victoria against her breast. As Victoria grew from newborn to infant to toddler, Josephine often reflected on the strange and winding path that had led to her greatest joy. The whispers that had once wounded her, "She'll never be a mother," had been silenced by the living proof in her arms. Vaughn proved to be exactly the father she had imagined, patient, gentle, delighting in each of Victoria's milestones with an enthusiasm that made Josephine love him even more deeply. He taught their daughter to ride before she could properly walk, much to Josephine's mingled amusement and terror. "She's a natural," he would insist, as Victoria giggled from her perch in front of him on his saddle. "A born horsewoman." When Victoria was 2, Mayor Thompson offered Vaughn partnership in the ranch, an unprecedented opportunity that recognized his contributions to making the property one of the most successful in the county. The promotion meant they could build a larger home near the main house, with room for the growing family Josephine now dared to envision. For despite all medical predictions, when Victoria was 3, Josephine found herself pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy and a deep sense that her body had finally healed from old wounds, both physical and emotional. Their son, James Vaughn Ellis, arrived on a stormy night in October, his lusty cries competing with the thunder outside. Victoria, initially suspicious of the small, noisy intruder, soon appointed herself his protector and teacher, solemnly explaining the workings of the world to her uncomprehending brother. "She gets that from you," Vaughn observed, watching their daughter demonstrate the proper way to hold a spoon to the baby. That teacherly patience. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier, louder, filled with the chaos and joy that children bring. There were difficult moments, of course, sleepless nights, childhood illnesses, the endless balancing act of work and family responsibilities. But beneath it all ran a current of gratitude so powerful that it sustained them through every challenge. On Victoria's 5th birthday, as they watched her blow out candles on the cake Martha had helped bake, Josephine felt Vaughn's arm slip around her waist. "Happy?" he asked quietly. She looked around their home, at Victoria's shining face, at James toddling toward the cake with determined steps, at the friends gathered to celebrate, and nodded. "More than I ever imagined possible." "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "when I rode into Redemption Springs that day, I was only planning to stay a few months, just long enough to earn money for my own spread further west. What changed your mind?" His smile was tender. "A schoolteacher with sad eyes and the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen." He kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made." Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house quiet, Josephine stood on their porch, gazing at the stars that had witnessed their journey. From inside came the sound of Vaughn's footsteps as he checked on the children one last time, a ritual he never skipped, no matter how late the hour. She thought of the young woman she had been, accepting the doctor's verdict as an immutable sentence. How wrong she had been to believe that her story was already written, her possibilities limited by what others declared impossible. "Mama," Victoria's small voice came from the doorway. "I can't sleep." Josephine opened her arms, and her daughter, this miracle she carried in her heart and body despite all odds, came to her, nestling against her side with perfect trust. "Tell me the story," Victoria requested, her voice already drowsy. "About how you and Papa met." "Well," Josephine began, stroking her daughter's hair as Vaughn appeared in the doorway, James sleeping against his shoulder. "It was a bright spring morning, and everyone said I would never be a mother. As she recounted their tale, edited appropriately for young ears, Josephine marveled at how a story of limitations had transformed into one of boundless possibility. In a life full of blessings, perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all, not just the children she had been told she would never bear, but the capacity of the human heart to hope beyond reason, to love beyond boundaries, to find joy in the very places where it had been told to expect only sorrow. Vaughn's eyes met hers over their children's heads, full of the same wonder and gratitude she felt. This was their legacy, not just Victoria and James, but the love that had made room for them against all odds, a love that had rewritten what was possible. In Redemption Springs, the whispers had changed. Now when Josephine passed the mercantile or the church, she heard different words. "There goes Mrs. Ellis, the one they said would never be a mother. Now look at her beautiful family." And Josephine, with her daughter's hand in hers and her son on her hip, would smile and keep walking, her heart full of the truth she had learned. That sometimes the most powerful words in the world are not "they said you never could," but "you did it anyway."